If you were asked to define domestic terrorism, could you do that? Could you come up with a couple examples? Well, if your first thought was Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing of the Federal Building, you wouldn't be alone. What you may not know, though, is domestic terrorism does not have a definition in Idaho code. A Senate bill making its way through the State House hopes to change that, though, by changing Idaho's current anti-terrorism law. But Senate Bill 1220 would render our existing terrorist act useless, according to one of the men who helped craft it decades ago.
It stands alone and hidden by the trees.
White supremacy first showed itself as an organized idea in Idaho in the 1970s, with the formation of the Aryan Nations compound outside Coeur d'Alene.
They were drawing in all kinds of dangerous trash.
It wouldn't be long before they became destructive. First, in 1984, two members of The Order, also known as the Silent Brotherhood, planted a bomb in the crawl space under the kitchen of the Ahavath Israel Synagogue. Nobody was hurt, but it caused thousands of dollars in damage. Then 2 years later, in North Idaho, another series of bombings in September of 1986. A violent trend was underway, which is why Idaho's law enforcement,
back in 1987,
like former State Attorney General Jim Jones, wanted a way to be tougher on domestic terrorists. Why?
Bill Wasmuth's house had been bombed.
Bill Wasmuth, the Coeur d'Alene Catholic priest at the forefront of organizing human rights rallies and protesting Aryan Nations gatherings, had a pipe bomb explode just outside his back door on September 15, 1986. He wasn't hurt, but Jones says the message was clear.
You know, it was a clear intimidation tactic by the Aryan Nations. And we didn't have a statute that was really adequate to address it, you know, something with a real heavy penalty.
So Jones helped draft a bill that would specifically target the use of terrorist tactics. But weren't threats of violence and actual bombings already a crime in the Gem State?
It wasn't if you didn't kill somebody. You know, if you just set off a bomb in the city limits, even though you were trying to intimidate the population, it wasn't something that could get you a life sentence.
They called it the Terrorist Control Act, and anyone convicted of conspiring with another person to hurt, threaten, oppress, or intimidate could be sent to prison for life.
It was regarded as one of the very first domestic terrorism bills, and it sent out the message, we ain't putting up with you terrorists.
But Jones is worried today's lawmakers might take the teeth out of Idaho's anti-terrorist law.
Senate Bill 1220 is commonly known as the domestic terrorism bill, but it really is a due process bill. Common, ordinary Idahoans are being unfairly labeled and tagged as domestic terrorists.
Senate Bill 1220 hopes to define domestic terrorism as activities done in cooperation with any foreign terrorist organization as defined by federal agencies.
In the absence of a federal congressionally authorized definition of domestic terrorist, everyone is making up their own definition.
That's your biggest issue with the bill, right? It's the rephrasing of what is domestic terrorism.
Right. Adding the requirement that the prosecutor prove that this was done in conjunction with one of those 70 organizations. Those guys are not going to support a bombing here in Boise. And that makes it, you can't get a conviction.
If we do not tie the definition of domestic terrorist to an FTO, ordinary citizens will continue to be targeted.
Representative Doug Pickett said this bill would also prevent state and local agencies from acting on false accusations.
Do you happen to have a disagreement with your neighbor? You better watch out. He may rat you out as a terrorist on the National Terrorist Hotline that was set up during the Obama administration.
Supporters point to dust-ups at school boards over the last few years as evidence this is happening today.
This past year, I had the unfortunate experience of being the target of my school board chair's rancor, and now I worry that she may have turned my name into the FBI and added me to that domestic terrorism threat tag.
Except USA Today looked into this 3 years ago, and based on an email from the FBI, such tags will only be applied to investigate and assess threats directed against school officials. The FBI said it does not investigate parents who simply speak out at school board meetings.
It's just a matter that it would never be used to go after school patrons or school boards or anything like that. That's crazy. And if school patrons got together 2 or more of them, and threatened violence that would be harmful to human life and was a violation of Idaho law for the purpose of intimidating or coercing the population, they ought to be prosecuted.
Jim Jones worries that this would just render that law, the current law, useless. Now, used as evidence as the national terrorist screening data, which has grown from 120,000 in 2003 to 2 million in 2023, as put forth by Representative Pickett today. But even he admits most of those on that list are foreigners. As for the argument parents who protest at school board meetings are being labeled and investigated as domestic terrorists by the Department of Justice, which you heard a lot of during debate over this bill, both in testimony today and by the bill's sponsor, that'd be Senator Kelly Anthon, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland never labeled them as domestic terrorists, and he said he supports parents' First Amendment rights.